You're clamoring about a dragon. Okay. Why should I listen to you? Well, let's see how you're reacting to the dragon. First of all, you're scared stiff and in a state of panic. That might indicate you're not the man for the job. Second, you're willing to use compulsion to harness other people to fight the dragon for you. So now not only are you terrified, you're a terrified tyrant. So then I would say, well, then you're not the Moses that we need to lead us out of this particular exodus. And maybe that's a neurological explanation. It's like, if you're so afraid of what you're facing, that you're terrified into paralysis and nihilism, and that you're willing to use tyrannical compulsion to get your way, you are not the right leader for the time.
The dragon represents a massive challenge with substantial risks, and although Dr. Jordan Peterson was speaking of how certain people plan to deal with environmental issues, his analogies apply to how we deal with any big challenge in life, including financial. Faced with the prospects of a global economic crisis, how will each one of us react? Are we going to take the necessary but hard steps to prepare for the storm and ride it out the best we can? Or are we going to give in to negative emotions, such as fear and anger, that will lead us to make bad financial decisions which will likely impact not just ourselves, but everyone around us? Family members, friends, loved ones, children, and so on. The World Bank in mid-September stated that, since the beginning of the year, a rapid deterioration of growth prospects coupled with rising inflation and tightening financing conditions has ignited a debate about the possibility of a global recession, a contraction in global per capita GDP. However, investment bank Morgan Stanley came out recently with a shocking statement. There is no longer a debate about this. Major economies are already in recession. It seems like the dragon is here then. How can we prepare to navigate economically difficult times? One could save more, or if one already has savings, one could buy cheap assets. During tough periods, markets tend to sell off aggressively, and so there might be opportunities to tap into if one has enough cash. One could be more responsible with discretionary spending, only buy what one needs. One could build additional income streams so that in case one is made redundant, their family doesn't suffer. There are many ways in which we can deal with this dragon. The question is, how many of us will actually do so? The situation is already very dire. Famine is now a real prospect across the world.
I accepted the UN estimates of starvation this coming year. 150 million people will suffer food insecurity. Food insecurity. Yeah, food insecurity. That's the bloody buzzword. Famine. Well, Michael Yon thought 1.2 billion. And then that it'll spiral, because he said what happens in a famine is that the governments go nuts, crazy. The governments destabilize, and then they appropriate the food from the farmers. Then the farmers don't have any money. Then they can't grow crops. And I think, yeah, that's exactly what they do. That's exactly what would happen. And so Jon told me 1.2 billion, and then Bjorn Lomborg said the same thing. I didn't even ask him. He just made it as an offhand comment.
We have already seen farmers protesting across the world this year, especially in the Netherlands, India, and Australia. But these were not global protests. These events might just be around the corner. The dragon is getting bigger. The challenge is growing. OECD data shows that household saving rates vary widely across the world, with some countries like Greece showing a negative 4.8% savings rate in 2021. i.e. Greek households spent more than their income last year, while Switzerland's household savings rate in 2021 was nearly 24%. This massive disparity of how prepared various regions are to deal with global recession and famine can also be seen within countries, with certain parts of the population being in a much better position to face this dragon than others. Will income inequality lead to social unrest? During very difficult economic times, the likelihood of such an event cannot be ruled out. Recently, the World Economic Forum published an op-ed entitled "What's New is Old: How Economic Discontent Triggered Unrest in the Past." In it, the global institution stated, "The French Revolution, a traumatic event that ultimately cost millions of lives and kick-started modern Europe, was preceded by an estimated 55% rise in the cost of bread. That's a smaller price hike than some countries have endured recently." According to the World Economic Forum's latest chief economist's outlook, economic discontent has been fueling febrile political dynamics, and the difficulty people continue to have when it comes to buying bare essentials is ramping up the risk of social unrest. That echoes similar warnings issued by the IMF and the UN in May. Since then, the inflation rate in the euro area has ticked up a further percentage point, and by nearly as much in the UK. That still pales in comparison to the cost of living increases that places like Argentina, Lebanon, or Venezuela continue to face. A recently published index found that more than half of 198 countries surveyed were at increased risk of civil unrest tied to the cost of basic necessities. These stats are alarming. Almost half of the world is facing economic headwinds of a magnitude so big that their populations are at risk of revolting as a result of this. However, not everyone will be affected by this dragon. Those that prepared will face the metaphorical beast quite well. But to do so, one must be in a good position not just financially, but also mentally and emotionally. In other words, one needs to be a certain type of character or to possess particular qualities that enable the individual to stand strong and face off the difficult times without fear, and certainly without coercing others into helping them. However, without facing the dragon, this economic catastrophe, we cannot get to the other side, where the sun shines and ourselves are stronger and better.
Make yourself as articulate in writing and thinking and speaking as you possibly can, because that opens the door to everything that you'll want to do in the future, no matter what it is. The more articulate person always rises, always. Because they lay out strategies more effectively. They lay out the reasons for doing something or for not doing something more particularly. They convince people, and properly so, that they can grapple with potential that lies ahead effectively. And they can defend themselves when they're challenged. And so all of that is going into the past, into the chaos of the past, you could even say, and pulling up the spirit that inhabits that from the bottom and uniting with it. And if you don't do that, well, you're defenseless in the face of the tragedy of life. And then that's not so good, because if you're defenseless in the face of the tragedy of life, then you get way more hurt than you would otherwise get, and so do the people around you. And then the probability that you're going to be resentful and bitter about that is really high, because no one likes to fail continually.
What we are facing are perhaps years of economic hardship. To deal with this successfully, not just for our own sake, but also for the betterment of our loved ones, we need to be strong mentally as well as financially. If we apply Peterson's advice to the current situation, it means to become articulate in dealing with the issue at hand, with economic challenges. What does this mean? Well, it means really understanding what is happening with the economy and how these events impact you personally, and then taking certain, planned, and pragmatic actions to mitigate or even thrive in the midst of the upcoming chaos. Economic ups and downs are inevitable. Financial markets fluctuate. Political regimes fall and new orders rise. Through all this change, the individual must face multiple dragons, challenges, and to defeat as many of these dragons as possible, one must become articulate in the issue at hand. This is not easy, and it likely requires years of hard work. But what is the alternative? It's worth getting ready for the coming economic crisis and potential social upheaval. As always, thank you for watching, and please do leave your thoughts in the comment section below. For more content like this, hit the like and subscribe buttons.